Obviously, this Facebook story has been unfolding now for almost 7 days, and I'm curious what your take is on this, given the perspective you have from running Twitter for 5 years.
Yeah, I think I'll try to offer something that hasn't been discussed widely outside the technology community. One of the concerns I have, or questions I have, is the impact it's going to have on the way people think about APIs and access to data in the future. Obviously, Facebook had built out this platform approach that enabled third parties to access this data and use them to interact with and engage with people on Facebook, and then turned that off some years ago now, and are now sort of seeing the consequences of some of that. I do think it will have an impact on the way technologists and company founders and CEOs going forward think about how that data will be used, how they can audit, how that data is disposed of, et cetera.
How does Facebook use data in a way that's different than the way Twitter handles data? Because as I understand it, Twitter is more protective of user data, though Twitter, of course, has its own issues, which we can talk about. But do you think Facebook has been too permissive and too careless about user data? You know,
just to be not to be an apologist for what's been going on, but this platform was public. Those APIs were public. People knew what those APIs were capable of, and they've been long disabled. The big difference between Twitter and Facebook is that on Facebook, there's lots and lots of personally identifiable information and demographic information. That turns out to be particularly helpful to advertisers. Advertisers want to be able to demographically target and micro-target, and Twitter doesn't have a lot of that information. To just go back a few years, and when I was running Twitter, frequently that was thought of as a disadvantage. Twitter doesn't know anything or enough about its users, so I can't target my advertisements as accurately as I can on Twitter, on Facebook rather. So there are two sides to this coin. In some instances, it's a real benefit to the platform's business, and in other areas, like we're seeing now, it comes back to haunt you.
We're seeing former Facebookers increasingly speak out about Facebook. WhatsApp co-founder Brian Acton tweeted #DeleteFacebook. This is a guy who sold his company to Facebook for $20 billion. Do you think Delete Facebook will take off? Do you think this will have a significant impact on users' desirability to use the platform?
I'm sure these people will be returning all their ill-gotten gains at any moment now. I don't think this is. These things happen. They come up every now and then when there's a big news event around these platforms. Facebook is such an important part of a lot of people's lives that it may be the case that a certain number of people here in Silicon Valley, inside the bubble, if you will delete it. I don't think it will be a big movement. It's too much. It's too important a part of too many people's lives around the world.
Is it disingenuous for people who made a lot of money on Facebook to now?
I already made a joke about that. Come on.
So you think it is? You think it is?
Well, I just think that it's easy, or it's easier, certainly, when you're not a part of the company anymore, to sort of sit back and lob in, Molotov cocktails. There are people working extremely hard inside these companies to do the right thing. I know Ed Ho, who leads product at Twitter, has been talking a lot about the issues, along with Jack, the issues Twitter is trying to deal with in this regard on the platform. So there are people inside these companies trying to do the right thing, and I tend to not love it when people can sit on the sidelines and sort of lob in criticisms to them.
Mark Zuckerberg said in an interview that perhaps tech should be regulated. It's not a question of if, but how. Do you think tech should be regulated, and if so, how?
I think it probably will. There will end up being regulations here. It sort of seems like that's that tide is headed in our direction, is incoming, if you will. The challenge, particularly around in areas of technology, is it tends to be frequently areas and concepts and details that are difficult to understand, which make them very susceptible to lobbying. And there are lobbyists on all sides of these equations. So, and then finally, I worry that in most cases, the regulations start to fight the last war, right? Well, in the past this happened, so let's prevent that from happening again. And the technologies are changing so quickly, they don't anticipate the next issue or challenge that may be coming up. And they they cause these companies work and maybe aren't addressing what the companies have to deal with and what society has to deal with next.
On that note, Zuck also said he's sure that version 2 of Russian meddling is happening on the platform. If he's sure it's happening on Facebook, it's probably happening on Twitter as well. Can Facebook and Twitter actually stay ahead of this? Now that they know that it happens, can they really keep up?
It's an arms race, like spam was in the past, like phishing and these other kinds of challenges were in the past. The difference now is that there are state actors involved on the other side, not just a few people trying to hack into an account. And when you've got state actors who have enormous amounts of resources, it's going to be a real battle keeping up with them and going after their new attack vectors. They're never going to attack the same way they attacked in the past. They'll try new and different tactics, and keeping up with that is going to be a real challenge for these platforms.
I want to talk to you about the Founders for Change movement, which you have committed to. This is a commitment
Always good to have a 54-year-old white guy on the gender equity conversation.
Founders committing to consider the diversity of a venture capital firm when taking money. So whether they have a woman or a person of color who can actually write a check. The founders of Airbnb, founders of Stitch Fix, founders of Lyft have all said that they will do this. Why do you think this is important?
So I think the difference between this and in the sort of commitments or efforts like this in the past are that you have a new generation of founders. You mentioned Katrina and Stitch Fix. And this new generation of founders have women leaders to look up to. You've got CEOs like Julia Hartz at Eventbrite and Anne Wojcicki at 23andMe, and sort of on and on and on. These existing female leaders and CEOs who this new generation of female founders can look up to and realize it doesn't have to be that way. So you see folks like Alyssa at HipCamp going and raising money from Sarah Tavel at Benchmark. Because she wants to be able to work with women investors. And I think that as that happens and as we see great companies making that demand, you'll see investors start to be more gender balanced firms.
So you think it will really change?
I do, and I think it's because of this new wave of founders, if you will, who have existing women CEOs who they can look up to and trust and who are there to tell them it doesn't have to be that way anymore.